Well, great. I will formally kick us off. Hello, everyone. My name is Vlietstra Wonnenberg. I'm a principal at Public-Private Strategies. And welcome to our fifth and final installment in our series, Post-Midterm Implications on Important Tax Policy Issues. This is an encore webinar. We built up our conversations on family policy, employment, healthcare, and business to chart a path forward. And I want to thank the Niskanen Center for their thoughtful leadership and partnership in the development of this series, and a special thank you to the Rockefeller Foundation for its generous sponsorship of these critical conversations. Apologies, my camera is blocked there. Our goal has been to address how the philanthropic community, nonpartisan advocacy community, and civil society broadly can prepare for the likelihood of divided government post this fall's midterm elections, and how we can best work together to achieve policy goals that create an economy and supports a democracy that leaves no one out. While we are still months away from knowing the exact formation of the new Congress, most are in agreement that there will be a shift that creates new reality for us to contend with as we look to advance pro-worker tax policies that support every member of American society. Our conversations have left us inspired, if not also somber, about the realities facing America. We are at a significant juncture for our democracy, and as Danielle Goonan of the Rockefeller Foundation shared last week, tax policy, when formulated thoughtfully and in support of all members of American society, is a pro-democracy policy. Today, for our encore webinar, we will explore more deeply in conversation with our special guest, former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan was the 54th Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, in office from October 2015 to January 2019. He was the youngest Speaker in nearly 150 years. During his tenure as Speaker, Speaker Ryan spearheaded efforts to reform our nation's tax code, rebuild our national defense, expand domestic energy production, combat the opioid epidemic, reform our criminal justice system, and promote economic opportunity. After his time in public service, Speaker Ryan founded the American Idea Foundation, which engages his unique relationship with grassroots organizations, academia, and think tanks, and national policymakers to develop new insights and to put those to work in improving public policy. We are excited to be in this conversation with you, Speaker Ryan, and as we imagine and strategize how to best lift up our communities and craft policy that serves everyone. Speaker Ryan, welcome.
Hey, Katie, thanks for having me. I was checking my weather app here, and it's like 84 degrees here in Wisconsin, which that's pretty hot for here in Wisconsin. So yeah, it's kind of a cooker here too. Good to be with you. I'll say just a couple things. So before I was Speaker, which was 2015, I was in Congress from 98 on. And for a good 5 years before that, I was a staff economics guy for Jack Kemp at a think tank he ran called Empower America. And we worked jointly with Scott Hodge that time at Heritage Foundation, where we created the per child tax credit. So I spent basically my adult life in tax policy, in a lot of poverty policy, and in EITC and those reforms. So, and I chaired the Ways and Means Committee before I was Speaker, which obviously has this jurisdiction. So it's an issue I've been involved in a long, long time. It's an issue I still work at Notre Dame, at my foundation, and at the American Enterprise Institute, where I'm a fellow. So it's something that's very near and dear to my heart, and I look forward to the conversation. So thanks for having me.
Well, we really appreciate you being here. And I think as we were talking in the green room before we started, our hope really is to have a conversation and perhaps steal from you some wise words as to, navigating policy and government, especially at these times where I do feel like there seems to be much more tension. And I think more seeing our lawmakers more in the corners of not being able to come together. And so I think that my first question is kind of a meaty one, as we are at this crossroads, the convergence of several crises, the COVID pandemic, inflation, the erosion of our democratic institutions, social safety infrastructure have, I think, left a lot of Americans struggling not only to make ends meet, but to imagine where their future is, the promise of America is even possible. And with the midterms looming and a divided government increasingly likely, what do you or how do you envision is what is possible now? And what immediate steps will the new Congress have to take to quickly and effectively respond to the needs of the American people?
Yeah, so I'm actually encouraged and optimistic, believe it or not. And that's not what most people say these days. The reason I'm encouraged and optimistic is because of technology, what I think that can do to streamline programs. I'll get into that what I mean by that in a minute. But also, I think there is a center consensus, center right, center left consensus on some of these issues that I actually intend to be a part of, that I think we're going to make a difference here. So a couple of things to set the table. Nothing's going to get done the rest of this year, right? I mean, maybe the CHIPS Act, which actually I think should get done, and some, caretaking issues, but nothing significant will get done because we're already in the silly season. Filing deadlines have happened. They're already occurred. Primaries are underway. People are in election cycle. So in Congress, the last 6 months of a 2-year term are, where we are right now, and that's this election. So I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, I think we're going to get the majority. We only have to pick up 4 seats. So let's just say, for the sake of this conversation, that's going to happen. Because I think the Senate's a much harder thing to predict, but I think in the House, it's probably the case. So what if I was talking to, philanthropy people and the folks that I spend a lot of time with at Ways and Means, I'd say a couple of things, but I can go on and on. So I want to answer your question specifically. You're asking what can get done in the next Congress?
Yeah, I think what would you say to encourage people to come together to really work on some of these big issues?
Yeah.
Societal, by leveraging the tax code, I think kind of your sweet spot, but also I think bigger of just this idea that I think people are feeling very much left out.
I spent a lot of time in this area, and I ran into a bunch of buzzsaws, political buzzsaws. I remember trying to reform the disability program. Ted McCann, whose screen is blacked out, ran a big subcommittee for me at Ways and Means. And we thought we were doing the right thing with this benefit offset to help people get on their feet and, disabled people get work. And I just ran into a complete political buzzsaw. And I found myself running into ideological, conflicts, which basically meant nothing got done.
Yeah.
So that sort of became an aha moment for me a number of years ago. The reason I'm giving you a long answer is because I think there's something here. And that is, I got so frustrated with just absolute impasses. And Republicans and Democrats had very different of opinions on how the safety net should be designed, what kind of incentives, how programs should be qualified and designed, and all of the rest. And I decided, let's go down this evidence path. Created this evidence-based policymaking commission. Patty Murray was my partner on it, so I made it very bipartisan. Then we passed the Evidence Act. That's now in law. And what we were trying to do, and I was trying to be one of the inventors of evidence-based policymaking, a new sort of segment of social science, particularly for the poor, where we just use evidence to guide what we do, how we design programs, where we place money. And that is sort of pre-partisan. It's post-partisan and pre-partisan. It is nonpartisan. The best example I could just off the top of my head, MICV. It's a women's early childhood intervention program, a nurse practitionership program. Bush started it, Obama continued it, and Trump reauthorized it. Why? Because it had really good data, evidence, and analytics that showed that this works extremely well. So going down the path of producing evidence, using randomized controlled trials, using evidence, peer review, and all of the rest, I think can really be the secret sauce to how you can get things done in whoever is running Congress, but particularly in a divided government. Because one side is not going to be able to completely dominate the other side. The way to split the difference on these sort of partisan and ideological divides is through very clear evidence that makes a difference, that is proven to work. That is where the body of effort needs to be. And I do think that we're seeing more and more of those being done. And then with respect to tax policy itself, I don't want to be like a senator and filibuster this thing. So, but I think evidence-based policymaking, using evidence, is the way to go. It is if people are coming in the door to talk to new chairmen of new committees, the new Ways and Means chair in the next session, you got to have evidence, and it can't just make an emotional appeal. You can't just make a partisan appeal, an ideological appeal. You got to make an evidence-based appeal and bring people from both sides of the aisle with you to show that, hey, we're just following the evidence. This is proven to work. This works really well. So I'm on the Notre Dame board of the Laboratory for Economic Opportunity. It's called LEO. I teach there as well. And we spend a lot of time on this. And it's a Republican like me with Democrats and other Republicans really advancing this stuff. And we're doing 80 RCTs a year with Catholic charities and you name the institutions, building just a huge bank of evidence that we intend to then go and inform policymakers on these things work. This is the way to go.
I think interesting that you brought up, the importance for evidence based, and, just to tease this out a little bit, Speaker Ryan, I think one of the challenges that we've been facing, especially, coming out of the pandemic, is I think this distrust of facts. And I think that you speak to me, like I come in here, I'm having a meeting with you, I'm talking to you about the child tax credit. There's such a overwhelming body of evidence about how important the advanced tax credits were for working families, but yet there's still I think the issue where people want to disagree, or we've seen it unfortunately with someone like Senator Manchin, who has questioned how those funds were truly used, even though we've come in with a lot of evidence. I think one of the things, I guess, just to ask you again, or ask you in a different way, is, how do you kind of navigate that when it doesn't seem that that evidence is there? Is it more just working towards, keep on like beating the drum towards the facts of the program and how it could help Americans? Is it making sure, like you said, you're bringing people along? Like what is some of that advice that you'd give for people who I think are feeling frustrated because the work has been done to really try to root this in evidence?
Okay, so let me give you the Republican and the conservative. Not everybody knows what a Republican is these days, frankly. I wonder myself sometimes. Let me give you the center right view on this, because you said something important. You said working families. So Joe, I talked to him, I don't know, months ago. There is a concern on my side of the aisle among my sort of ideological brethren that if you do not have work as a component of these benefits, you have a serious problem, and you're going to create people stuck in dependencies where they're not going to have upward mobility. So on my side of the aisle, where people who spend time in the poverty space, having work tied to benefits is extremely important,
right?
Very important. So in the seats and on the child tax credit, debate, there was a lot of that was being proposed, which severed the connection to work.
Right.
That is where you're going to have a problem with my side of the aisle. And I can guarantee you in the next Congress, assuming it is, as I say, you're going to go nowhere with that. I'm a huge fan of the EITC. I worked to reform the EITC when I ran Ways and Means. I beat my head against the wall with the Treasury Department to try and make it monthly. And I won't get into all the details of that. It's total. They have these system problems at Treasury. So people like me want to build reforms around the EITC type of framework, embedded in a monthly benefit. And I'm going to be coming out with, along with Matt Wadinger, Angela Rashidi, Ted McCann, and other scholars at AEI, with the proposal in this winter. In November, we're going to come out with on how you merge the CTC with the EITC and how make a really good flexible program. So childless adults as well as part of this. So I think there are things we can do to merge these benefit structures. But again, when you're dealing with a Republican or a conservative, whatever you want to call the person, a center-right person, the work, you do not want to disincentivize work. You want to encourage work, because work works, and work creates upward mobility, and work gets people out of poverty. So the last thing a person on my side of the aisle would want to sign up for, and I think this speaks to the Joe Manchin point, was if you do it in such a way that it severs the connection to work, you're going backwards. You're being counterproductive in your policy.
As it relates to, I think maybe this is the challenge with perhaps for, conservatives or Republicans who are, I would say, adamant about the work requirement and those, advocating for it. How do you see those, I think there's some frustration because we're at this moment in time. There's, economic hardship being felt. I think the data does show that the child tax credit did really help. But again, where do you feel? I'm not saying that we're trying to be existential and saying we should be above politics, but how do advocates in this space work to, I think maintain their moral compass and what they believe is right, and of course negotiate with lawmakers who are ultimately responsible for implementing these policies?
And you have different kinds of views on my side of the aisle. Mitt, for example, what I'd say is kind of the pro-family side of this. There's pro-work economic people there's the pro-family people. I think you don't have to choose between these things, in my opinion. But But some people think that way, and they go in their corners within our party. So that's before you even get to the other side of the aisle. That's what we're trying to fashion. We're trying to find a way of how do we sort of thread this thing so that you're pro-family, child rearing, and pro-work, which is, in my mind, upward mobility and getting people out of poverty. And I think this is where I'm excited about technology. Like I mentioned before, Katie, it was so frustrating to me working with Treasury Department. I was just trying to get this childless adult thing funded for EITC. And I was trying to make it a monthly payment, because if you get a lump sum at the end of the year, it doesn't have the kinds of effects that you want it to have, like you would if it were embedded in the paycheck. And they simply do not have the systems, the technological systems to do that. If you did through the W-2 Social Security system, you could do it, but then you're basically then it's a huge policy change. We're going to bite off more than we could politically chew. Yeah. So we didn't do that. But I believe with digital technology, with digital dollars, you can do this. And this is, again, one of the things we're working on at AEI. And I'll give you a little bit of a showcase, which is when we will have stable coins and perhaps a Fed CDBDC, central bank digital currency. Mm-hmm. It will have to be a two-tier system where the Federal Reserve will not be providing the retail digital dollar to the consumer. It will go to the banks.
Right.
That second tier will provide digital currencies to people. You can embed technology into that payment at that second tier retail level to the person, money that performs in whichever way you want it to perform. And you can make sure that money goes to its intended purpose, doesn't need a ton of bureaucracy to implement it, and can weed out all of the fraud that we obviously have pretty big error rates and fraud rates in these things. And the savings you get from that, again, you got to score all of this. The savings you get from that can plow into better benefits and better constructed benefit design. So I'm a big believer in combining people's benefits in such a way that it makes a lot of sense on a customary basis, that the benefit cliffs aren't so sharp that they disincentivize upward mobility, that you smooth out the benefit cliffs for a person or family coming out of poverty, and that you algorithmically design the benefit for that custom, family's need based on work, based on their station in life, based on their kid's situation, based on education situation, based on the other benefits that they need to have, which is maybe rental assistance, transportation, heating assistance, which is a big where I come from, things like that. Yeah. I believe with digital programmable money, at the retail level, you can fix a lot of those glitches, save a ton of money, and make these benefits better, more responsive, more attuned to the specific person's needs, and not have benefit cliffs that make somebody take 3 steps backwards when they take 2 steps forward. And I think there's some good economics behind that. Yeah. And invariably in all of this, you have to have a work incentive, a work component, or a training component in that. That's a belief I have, that people on my side of the aisle have. And I think there's plenty of room to compromise inside of this to get really good policy forward. What you'll probably have to do is pilot projects to run some randomized controlled trials to see how it works. Yeah. And then implement something like that. But that's my guess on how this.
I think this is, from a policy perspective, and I know, as a staffer of the Ways and Means Committee and then chairman and speaker, and I think a lot of people in the philanthropy space, have been around for a while, just to be blunt. And I think that is where we sit in 2022. And to your point is, how are we not leveraging technology? How are we not leveraging real data? Because I think that is part of the frustration, especially when you're talking about, benefits cliffs. And if you're not, it would be a much better system if we could be looking at someone's cash flow, maybe only 30 days behind, or what their pay is, and being able to adjust and make sure that they are receiving the benefits they need, and sometimes increasing them or decreasing them, so that they are making sure that they can make their rental payments, or that they are not losing their heating assistance. And I think some of the frustration we've definitely heard is, I'm not going to ask you a question because I think we could go into a long thing, but I do think the frustration with the IRS and broadly Treasury, but then that becomes, I think, another political issue with, as I joke, advocating for IRS funding is like the least popular thing
Good luck
to
with
do.
that.
But we
That's a
need
whole
it
other conversation.
because if we could modernize and bring it up, I think it could be the IRS could actually be a really powerful tool in helping us address some of these issues. Because, as soon as you start talking about the Social Security Administration, there's a whole host of hornet's nests of issue. But if I could go back to something that you just popped into that conversation, which is the fact that Senator Romney has introduced the Family Security Act 2.0. It's right now, I still think a plan, so you're still getting some input. But I think, in your mind, how does something like that get support even from the conservatives in his own party? And I think, I know that you do talk with Senator Romney and your staff, but I also wonder, have you expressed to him some places where you think there could be wiggle room or there should be openings to strengthen his proposal?
Yes, so I had to make a confession. I haven't read the last iteration. I've been pretty busy. In version 1.0, I have spoken a bit about this, and I believe in emphasizing work a bit more, because I worry you're gonna keep people stuck in their station of life. And you're gonna slow down upward mobility.
Yeah.
So I have that concern with his earlier proposal. I don't know where this version is, but we're all, he's a very close friend of mine. So we not just the two of us, but the sort of supply side work conservatives, AEI types with the family groups, plenty of room for us to find common ground.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that on the Republican side. It's just, can you bridge the left and the right on this thing? That's where I think I've been looking for a philanthropy that has the kind of money to go set up some pilot projects to do these things. My foundation's pretty small. It's the American Idea Foundation. We seed capitalize poverty groups that then we run RCTs, usually through Notre Dame, with them to build models that work. I'm a big believer in these wraparound services, case management models, that if you can build the benefits in such a way that are sort of digitally designed, and you can sort of fix those benefit cliffs, I really think you can come up with some really unique designs. And if a philanthropy was out there that could say, you know what, instead of waiting for the IRS to get this right, or Treasury, we're just going to go build a mousetrap ourselves, and we're going to go run experiments and programs, and then come back to the government and say, see what you could do if you guys got your technological act together. That's the kind of thing that I think needs to happen. And the more we can get that kind of experimentation going, the sooner you can go to policymakers and say, see what is possible. And then you can get, I think, bipartisanship. I really do believe, again, this goes back to my whole evidence, crusade. Look, I'm a huge fan of what we did in 1996. I was a staff guy then working on that on TANF. But a lot of people hated it on the other side of the aisle. I would argue that the results speak for themselves, child poverty and the rest. And I do think evidence-wise, data-wise, the jury's in on some of these things. So we can build on those successes, move forward, and promote work and family concurrently. And I think digitizing these benefits and adding those components to it with some customization and personal, case management, I think is really the way to go.
Yeah. And I think also just exploring, I think, as we all know, spending, or I will not speak for you, sir. But I've spent a lot of time thinking about policy, and I think the overall is, how do we make sure that they're accessible? And, I would throw out the word equity here. And I, wonder, as you have been thinking with your colleagues at Notre Dame or across the foundation space, ensuring that which we should be, I think, more using technology, how do we continue to make sure that it is encompassing all, and is not inadvertently leaving some out? And I do think, because of the power, because of the amount of information and data that we're sitting on, that I actually think we could be way more efficient as a government and way more strategic. And so it will be interesting to follow along with you and Ted and the American Idea Foundation to see where this nets out.
At the end of the day, now this is more of a conservative thing to say. I think federalism is going to make a big difference here. You got to give states, the ability to go out and experiment and come up with some new solutions, and then contrast and compare them to one another. That's kind of what we did with welfare in the 90s. I do think if you can give states big enough waivers with a lot of their money to try and experiment with these ideas, you're going to find some successes that can be scaled and replicated later on. That's basically what my foundation does, is build data clearinghouses on scalable, replicable poverty solutions that can be scaled out. And so I'm actually excited. I think we're on the cusp of a new, form of poverty fighting with evidence-based policy making, proven scalable solutions that have just great success. It kind of gets the partisanship and the ideology out of it. And that's why I'm kind of excited about it, because then you combine the advent of digital technology, digitization, programmable money that's coming, it's around the corner. That gets pretty exciting. But because government's so slow on these things, it's going to take the for-profit and the not-for-profit philanthropy sector to lead these reforms, to lead these designs, to lead these pilot projects, so to speak, examples, probably with a bunch of state government, in good states working on this to sort of show the way forward. So I think that the field we have to till is that right now. And so if you're thinking divided government, having some success stories there, I think is a good way to go.
Well, and I think that part of the opportunity that exists, unfortunately, because of a little bit of the challenges that we're seeing at the federal level, is that I think they're seeing a lot of innovation and leadership happening in the states, both Republican and Democrat. And I would, it would be great to know that we could model even, bipartisanship on a state level, working across different places. Can I ask you one more question? Because I know we're at time, but it is an interesting budget question. And this comes from an audience member who's listening. With inflation and interest rates, suggested fiscal limits are coming back after decades of weak budget constraints. Congress is used to using deficit spending to enable deal making. How will Congress adapt to this new reality given the breakdown of regular order? And what do you see as the low-hanging fruit for significant new revenue? I think that's an interesting question, given that I do think we're going to see continued fiscal constraint. And we have been able to use deficit spending to support many of these programs. And so what's your take on that?
I'm really worried about this, very worried. I'm worried we could lose our dollar as a reserve currency, which means we will not be able to afford this social contract we have right now, let alone doing more to it. So here's where people may not like the answer here. You've got to work on the big entitlements. If you want to free up fiscal space for other things government's supposed to do, like a safety net, you got to work on the healthcare entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and you got to get these things under control, because they themselves will just chew up the rest of the budget. And you literally cannot mathematically tax your way out of that. If you try, you'll kill the economy. You'll slow down the economy. You'll slow down wage growth, productivity, jobs. So you got to have economic growth if you want an escalator of upward mobility. We need to obviously have better design, safety net programs to allow people to get on the escalator of upward mobility. But you've got to deal with these big, earned entitlements, these big middle class entitlements. Get them under control. I think there's obviously, I think the policy, we know how to do it. We know how to do that. We just never had the politics to do it. But if you care about discretionary spending or even safety net, mandatory spending, you got to get these big things under control this decade if we're going to have a chance of getting out of a debt crisis. And so looking for new revenue, frankly, doesn't make a whole lot of sense if our spending is really going off the charts, and it is. So we've got to deal with that spending problem, because if we just try to chase that spending line with more revenue, we're never going to catch up. We're still going to have a debt crisis and a worse economy on top of it. So it's really important we have a foundation of solid economic growth, entrepreneurial activity, hiring people. And that, to me, we're going into tight labor markets because of demographics, but nevertheless, we want high wages. We want real wage growth, So the Fed's going to, I'm kind of surprised. I don't think they'll get I have a hard time believing we're going to get out of this thing without a recession. So the Fed's going to do what it's going to do. It's going to slow down everything. And inflation, it will take them a while to get under control. That's my personal opinion. So it's going to be an ugly time. It's going to be an ugly period. There's going to be more poor. There's going to be inflation is going to eat away at people's paychecks. So you got to get the supply side of this right, which is pro-growth economics, not big tax increases, thinking that I can just pay for more programs. You got to get the economy growing and going. And then you've got to work on these other, innovative proposals while reforming these entitlement programs. Stay tuned. This is exactly what I'm working on at AEI. We're going to roll out a really big proposal on what we think is the way to do this, which is to have entitlements that work, that fulfill the mission of health and retirement security, that are solvent, the debt gets paid down and off, and a resilient safety net wired for the 21st century using the technologies of today, but getting people on the path of upward mobility and being very pro-family at the same time.
Well, I know that we're a little bit over time, Speaker Ryan, and I do want to thank you. I think in just a few closing things, as we continue to, I think, all try to figure out our place in the world and the policies and programs I think are really important to families and working families, because I do think that, one thing I would, flag, and I don't need to say this to you, but those listening, is that, we want to make sure that people, have dignity in what they do. And if that is, being a parent, being a worker, and finding, I think, opportunities for people to do so is really important. And I think that it has to be it's not a one, box solution. I think the thing that we really learned over many decades of social policy is that it does actually, I can use your word to use, wrap around. It has to be multifaceted. It has to include a lot of different components. And I do really hope that the advocates in this space, the reformed politicians that are working in this space like yourself, and I think just the idea that ultimately what I hope is that we're all working to ensure that people have a better life than they have today, and that they feel that sense of pride in what they're doing, and that they can support their children, they can support their families, and they can live a better life. But, I just want to thank you and Ted on your team for being a great partner in this and spending some time with us. I really do want to thank the Niskanen Center, who has been working with us, and the Rockefeller Foundation. And I think just in general, we welcome a continued dialogue across the aisle in all sectors, private and public, and philanthropy. And we're going to share today's recording and the previous webinars with everyone. And I think as we continue to dream and work towards a more economically vibrant and sustainable America. So with that, Speaker Ryan, thank you for joining us, and thank you all, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks for having me, Katie. Pleasure to be with you. Thanks.